Hello, this video is going to talk you through Module 11 in our course, Visual C#. The topic 1 is simply to read and complete a journal. You can follow the directions online. The Create a Journal entry is up above when you start when you select the journal item in Blackboard. Topic 2 is going to be having you work with or create your own database, and I'm going to highlight this a couple times, but you must be using Visual Studio 2017 version 2. When you go to the search bar and you start to type in Visual Studio, make sure you choose the one that has the parens 2 after it. That's because it has the newer updates, and it's the Enterprise Edition. And that's what you need to do. You're going to download tutorial 11-1 from the course sites. So if we take a look at Module 11, we are going into Topic 2 because we already talked about Topic 1. And in Topic 2 is you'll need to read these sections in your textbook. You should read through this information here about databases, and you are going to be creating a table of data. Please note that tables of data are often used with SQL, so this is actually kind of like a SQL command. Notice this varchar. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's a variable character, and 255 means that it's 255 characters long. When you work with a database, we've already talked about this in class. You have rows and you have columns. The rows are considered a record, and the columns are considered fields. And sometimes you have a primary key field, and we will talk about that also. This is a tutorial that you should download, tutorial 11-1. Download it into a location that you are going to remember. And I already have it downloaded. I'm going to extract it, and we are going to start to work with that tutorial. Once the project is extracted, you're going to want to start it. You can start it with a .sln file, except you want to be careful that it opens up the right version of Visual Studio. You might instead choose to go to the correct version of Visual Studio, can't say that tonight, that you have open, and go ahead and search for that. I put mine, I believe, in the Downloads folder, and C#, etc. But you might go ahead and open it that way, because then you know that you're going to be opening the correct version, except now this is not showing the correct version. I think I had chosen open a file instead of open a project, so if you choose File, Open Project, you should be able to select this solution file here, and that is going to be the file that we are going to start working with. We are going to be using the textbook, and we are going to be stepping through the tutorial in your textbook, so you can go ahead and turn to that in your book, but we're also going to have a little bit of information on this particular slideshow. And then when you're done, I want you to take a screenshot rather than submitting the whole project to me. And I will model that here for you so you can follow along on this tutorial if you would like. Alright, so topic 2 is the one we're doing. We've got this file loaded, and if we go to our textbook now and look at the tutorial. So what we are going to be working on is actually connecting or creating our own database. Now, this particular project that you downloaded actually has a database built into it. I think that is a mistake. I am going to show you how to create one from scratch. And so we are going to go ahead and choose Project, and we are going to add a new item. And when we add a new item, we want to look for a service-based database. This is on page 651 in your textbook. You want to look for a service-based database right here. Now I'm going to, instead of naming mine what the textbook says, because the textbook says to name it phone list, but that one's already existing in this project, just to practice this, I'm going to name it something different and just something like my phone list, so that I have a little bit different name. I'm going to click Add, and it'll take just a moment in order for that to load, but we're going to see that load over here as an MDF file in your Solution Explorer. If I click on that MDF file, double click on it, I get this warning. It says it could potentially harm my computer. Would I like to open this file? I'm going to click yes. I'm not exactly sure what warnings you might get. There's a couple different places where it gets a little bit hung up, so to speak. Once you have the Server Explorer window open, you are going to click on Tables, and there's nothing there basically. So when I clicked on it, nothing showed up. That's because I need to right click, and I'm going to add a new table. So just because you have a database created doesn't mean there's anything in it right now. So you are actually creating what's going to go into a database. We are creating a phone entry database. So our database is going to include a name and is going to include phone numbers. It'll take a little bit of while to load this. You can take a look at the SQL statement down below here. So this is create table. When you use SQL, these commands in blue are usually capitalized. And then DBO stands for database object, I think. You are going to want to change the name of table here to whatever you are creating or whatever table that we are making. And if I look ahead in our textbook, we are creating people to go in our phone book. So we are going to rename this person. And that is on page 655 in your textbook, just so that you know. I kind of went out of order a little bit while it was loading. When you start a new database and when you work with databases, there's often something called a key field. They are going to tell us to make this a person ID. So we are going to name it person, capital P, and then ID is usually capitalized. And it's going to be an integer data type. And because this is going to be what's called a key field, you need to go over here to the properties, and we need to change the property for identity specification. We want to make the identity specification true instead of false. Okay. If you toggle this plus sign next to identity specification where it says is identity, we need to make that true in order to make that a key field. And then these two should show up. It's going to increment by 1 and it's going to start at 1. That's what the seed means. Next, we are going to add a name field, and then we get to choose how long to make that name field. And N, which is variable character, 50 is usually pretty typical. And then we're going to choose number, and they told us to go ahead and use an nvarchar 50. 50 means that it's going to take up 50 spaces. So we're setting aside 50 spaces for the name and 50 spaces for the number, and we do not want them, we're going to uncheck allows null, which means that it could be empty. Okay, allows null means that it could be empty. Okay, because we deselected allows null, that means that we don't want it to be empty. So allows nulls means that it could be empty, but we deselected that, so we aren't going to allow them to have an empty field. It must be filled. And that's the very first step for creating your database. If we, and this is where some errors sometimes occur. The next thing we're going to do is click Update, and if everything is working correctly, it'll do this preparing update script, and we'll cross our fingers that we have no errors. But this is usually where it starts to crash. It did not crash, which is good, but I have run a database a few times on this version, and so everything might be kind of squared away. You might run into some issues, and I'll have some workarounds for those. But then we're going to update the database, and it'll take a little bit of time to do that. And then the last thing that we might need to do, there's a Server Explorer window over here. We are going to potentially need to refresh this over here also, because we want this person table to show up. So you need to click Update here, And if there are some error messages that show up, there's some help data that I will give you in a little bit. And then you're going to go to the Server Explorer here, and if you want to pin that down so it's always available, and if you click the refresh on that, then the person table should show up. Now, what we need to do is put some data in there. So in order to do that, we go to right click on the person table, and we are going to show the table's data, which means I want to see what kind of data is in there. And since we created this data from scratch, there's nothing there. So it's our job to fill them in. And so we are going to choose the Flintstones today and fill in some information there. I don't know why there's a red key there, and get a few more characters filled in, and Dino gets to have a phone number too. Etc. Now, once that is all done, you want to make sure that you I don't know if we need to click refresh to save it, or I just go over here and do File, Save All to make sure that it is saved. So we have 3 pieces of data in there. It doesn't look like Mr. Slate saved because I didn't click below. So if I wanted to, I could add that back in. And if I click below and then I do File, Save All, we should have a database with 5, or excuse me, and this one's 4 items set up. Now I'm going to address the database that was already existing there, and that's this phone list MDF. And we are basically going to do the same thing only with phone list. If I double click on phone list, it gives me the warning about unsecure path. I say OK, but now this is one of the error messages that you might receive when you're working on things. So it says the database file is incompatible. To resolve this, you must update or upgrade the database file by creating a new data connection, or you must modify the existing connection. So we click OK. And what that means is I need to go over here to phone list, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to modify connection to fix this error. And this is an error that you might run into in all of these tutorials. I'm going to just go through, and this is set up correctly. I'm going to browse and make sure that it's calling on phone list. That's the name of this one. So I'm going to click open. I'm going to click OK. And now it says the file that I'm attempting to is not compatible. To continue, I must upgrade. And that's why it's throwing an error. It wants to make a copy of this database file for me to work with it. So I'm going to say yes to this. If you are working in a company, you might not want to do that, but it's basically going to make a copy within this project of that. And since we're doing self-contained projects, it's okay for us to do that. Then you would have the same thing to do. Now this one's already been created, and so if I right click in here and I show this table's data, because it was already created before, it actually has a few more data items in it, and this is the one that you would see in the textbook as an example. But that shows you how to address one of the error messages that you might run into. Alright, that's it for tutorial 1.